Welcome back to my disembodied voice. Now, last time we were here, we had gone through the first 4 domains of our 7 villain introductions, and to avoid relitigating the previous video, I'm going to keep this introduction brief as we recap what we discussed before. A movie villain's introduction, the very first moments on screen, is all about a carefully constructed psychological moment designed to create menace, shock, horror, intrigue, and, at times, even a reluctant empathy. And through deliberate cinematic choices, filmmakers present the villain as either a kind of dark mirror reflecting the audience's hidden fears, impulses, and anxieties, all whilst allowing the darkness to be viewed from a safe distance, or as something truly powerful, which we can only imagine coming up against and how devastating that would be. Basically, the antagonist is there to create conflict, dread, havoc, and engage with us. And one such common technique to introduce a villain is through a senseless, cruel act, immediately establishing what is often called a moral event horizon. This signals to the audience that the character lacks empathy, it raises the stakes of the story, and it creates an immediate sense of aversion and fear. Monsters and creatures are often introduced with size, savagery, and vicious lethality, which establishes them as too powerful for humans, or, in the case of something like a giant shark, it's of more than the usual considerable size, which thus increases the immense harm to bathers when it finally starts eating them. Coming back to human antagonists, they may also be given something called weaponized charisma, so they are introduced as highly intelligent, charming, or confident, and this attracts the audience despite their heinous nature. The psychological effect of a good villain introduction creates a paradoxical attraction to the dark side, allowing the audience to briefly align with the villain even if we are repulsed by them. We explore their needs, wants, philosophy, or in the case of a giant shark, we respect how dangerous the ocean is and how merciless the monster beneath will be. But villains can be many things. They can be the architect of chaos, an intellectual manipulator, or an unstoppable force. The point is, our very first meeting with our monster/villain needs to hit the right notes because you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Now, in the last video, we covered the hidden monster, the crime scene, the powerful tyrant, the caged beast. So, with those 4 categories done, let's come on to the last 3 parts of our flow-through chart, which are the POV, the full face, the behemoth. Right then, let's crack on, but firstly, as ever, let me scamper up the crow's nest and shout spoilers ahoy for any movie or TV show we cover today, so you have been warned. Okay, first of all, let me start by repeating you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And in horror, you have to hit the home run right off the bat, or people will be merely laughing at your movie rather than being terrified and engrossed in it. And a great way to build intrigue, manipulate imagination, build suspense, and bring the audience into the very heat and heart of a movie is to use the POV. We are introduced to our antagonist by looking through their eyes, which immediately forces us into an emotional dyad of involuntary complicity and heightened anxiety as we are behind the eyes of the antagonist, but despite this compulsory voyeurism, we are still missing so much crucial information. Okay, so POV stands for point of view, and it's a brilliant way to introduce an antagonist, and perhaps this was best done by John Carpenter in his 1978 masterpiece Halloween. In Halloween, Carpenter allowed the audience to see through the villain's eyes and create an immediate sense of unease and complicity. And he did this by drawing us into the scene and creating a coagulation of tension and intimacy. Now, in the killer POV shot, an unattributed subjective camera places a threat within the scene without fully revealing it, and we are the eyes through that scene. And subjectivity is the key here because, unlike the hidden monster where we don't know what is doing this, we still have crucial information being withheld of what is the killer, who is the killer, but now we have a front row subjective seat and we are fully in the fantasy, imagination, revulsion and fear of what is unfolding as we are being led slowly towards a violent act with our eyes purely on rails, almost like a railgun shooter game if you were playing in the arcade. And what makes this technique especially compelling is that it complicates the relationship between the film's camera and the audience, and the viewer is both involved in passive voyeurism and gratuitous sadism, where we are being entertained with a close-up feast of blood, gore and violence. However, seeing through the antagonist's eyes does not necessarily mean that we sympathise with them. Rather, it creates a disturbing split between perspective and allegiance. We are here to occupy the villain's visual position, yet we remain morally opposed to what they represent. And inside that uneasy gap, horror finds much of its power to entertain and twist its audience. So, as I said before, we are both observer and unwilling participant, trapped in this voyeuristic experience that is immersive, disorientating, and deeply uncomfortable. Point of view is also valuable because it can reveal a character's mental state right from the off, and this is where we empathise and use the visual and auditory parts of the brain, set off the amygdala, and the thalamus also starts to respond to all this visual and aural information being fed to it. When filmmakers show us a world exactly as a character sees it, they start to blur the line between reality and perception, allowing the audience to experience paranoia, hallucination, or a psychological collapse from inside the person's mind, behind their eyes, and empathy is a powerful human emotion. And remember, we can empathise with someone, even if we don't agree with them, we can sort of see why they're doing it or understand that this is wrong, because that's how humans work. And it's important I reiterate this because we don't have to agree with what we see, but we form an understanding of isolation, distance, frustration, and by listening to the breathing, seeing what eyes linger on, such as knives or sexualized body parts, our anterior insular cortex lights up when we're observing someone or focusing on a distressed state, allowing the viewer to feel, reason, and pretend to be somebody else, to step inside that fantasy, to be led on rails by these eyes and see through the visionary world of someone who is maybe got mental health problems or is just plain evil. However, whilst we are enjoying the darkness of being behind our killer's eyes, our supramarginal gyrus, which is located where the temporal, parietal and frontal lobes meet, auto-corrects you from just feeling like a lurid killer, and it helps separate your own emotional state from the screen so you can process and consider your feelings properly. And whilst Michael Myers climbs the stairs and hacks a young lady to death, so much of our brain is feeling, second-guessing, disliking, or maybe enjoying, and being thrilled all at once. And when the reveal of Michael as a child comes at the end and it's a real gut punch, the joy of the POV is that it is entertaining, it causes anxiety, and it uses voyeurism to bring imagination alongside your own inner moral compass, and this builds fear and engagement, which immediately draws the audience in to the authenticity of the movie and keeps it as something memorable. As I discussed in the last video, the imagination is a wonderful thing to elicit engagement because rather than just being shown or told something, the audience fills in the blanks and personalises the film with this deliberate lack of information about who, what, why, and the lack of being able to see clear facial delineation in our antagonists requires imagination, which creates involvement, fantasy, and engagement, and it personalises the movie as if it's been made for us, and our subjective interpretation gets overlaid onto the whole film. And the reason so many people love movies like Halloween is because Michael Myers is introduced from our viewpoint. We are inside his head and behind his eyes, so we are already making connections, reasoning and guesses to what he is, who he is, why he's doing this. And as it's not told to you yet, the character is immortalised through this early subjective personalisation where you fill in the blanks as we watch him hack a young lady to death. Now, of course, we find out Michael is a young boy, and that makes it even more disturbing, but at the start, you are front row at a gratuitous crime scene, and we are complicit and part of it through the point of view. And staying with our previous video, I discussed mirror neurons, which activate when we see someone do something and we try to imagine what that person feels. And mirror neurons are an important part of empathy, which again doesn't mean we are psychopathic killers who agree, but we can imagine, try to understand, and also feel the horror of a situation as we work out why this killer is acting like they are and doing what they're doing. Okay, so let's go from one extreme to the other. Let's go from no face and the POV to seeing the full face. Our villain is introduced early on and we see every facial detail up close, so we are immediately given familiarity, and as these introductions are establishing skill and fear, the full face introduction should always come with the villain succeeding triumphantly whilst we see a demonstration of their brutality. Villains with full face reveals early on tend to have very distinct faces. Darth Vader has his mask, Freddy Krueger is horribly burned, the Joker in The Dark Knight has outlandish makeup on, and Pennywise the Dancing Clown is, well, a clown. And clowns come with a whole other set of issues around people's general phobia and dislike of clowns. Now, for a full face reveal villain in the opening scene, it's good to have something called the kick the dog moment. This is basically a scene which establishes brutal cruelty. Now, Pennywise is very distinct in the fact that he has a white face with red stripes and orange hair. However, upon meeting him and getting a long, lingering look at his face, the scene ends with Pennywise biting the arm off a child before dragging this poor young boy into the drain, and we are left with a true, brutal moment of cruelty that shows just how merciless, heartless, and evil this antagonist is. Now, Pennywise is a clown, and clowns are usually associated with fun and frolics, but he looked slightly distorted, and with our own doubts about clowns taken to one side, we can also see that Pennywise is being a jester and a kind of giggling nice person because he's trying to groom an innocent child into reaching out, giving him his arm, and we get a cognitive dissonance straight away as we see a strange, distorted, unnatural looking creature acting very friendly and goading an innocent boy into reaching into the sewers. We know straight away this is bad news. We know straight away this isn't good, but at the same time, clowns' long history of being entertainers creates an initial kind of an oddness, an uncomfortableness. However, once we get the kick the dog moment and a small child is brutally maimed, we are in no doubt of what we're dealing with here. Another brilliant example of the full face introduction is Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight. Unlike villains who are concealed or partially obscured, the Joker is presented as someone whose face must be studied because he loves showing it off. Even Commissioner Gordon says he loves showing us his face when giving photos from the CCTV camera to Batman. And his smeared makeup, Glasgow smile scars and his fixed expressions create a massive sense of visual unease, making his appearance inseparable from the threat he represents. And because the audience is allowed to examine him in detail with lingering close-ups on his face, this familiarity does not reduce fear, instead it intensifies it. Now, Ledger's performance strengthens this introduction by making the Joker feel both calculating and unreadable. His voice pauses. He has sudden shifts in energy, and his unsettling humour suggests a character who enjoys destabilising everyone around him. Importantly, the Joker's threat is not based only on physical brutality, but on the ideas he represents. We are not simply looking at a violent man here, but at a face that seems to embody disorder itself. In this way, the full-face introduction can work by not hiding monstrosity, but by placing it directly before us and daring us to look away, and, as he gives the
I believe whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
We have his face as the whole picture, and we see all the scars, rotting teeth and makeup, and it causes us to be confronted by his deliberately outlandish presentation and facial mutilation. The full face reveal also manipulates brain hormone chemistry as, in Pennywise's case, the amygdala and fear response of adrenaline changes once the villain is introduced, because adrenaline gets metabolized and changed into dopamine as we start to enjoy the film. And by the time Pennywise comes back, we get a hybrid mix of adrenaline and dopamine, because whilst we should remain scared of him, we're also there to see his antics and we're enjoying the story. So we get dopamine and adrenaline mixing from the creepy bad guy, but dopamine is rewarded through the great story and what's going to happen next and the excitement. So we enjoy the journey on kind of a roller coaster, fight or flight, but also an engrossed fascination. And it's a testimony to movies as, although they are only using two of our senses, visual and aural, they create fear, drama, alarm, dread, humour, enjoyment, and all of these things affect our thalamus, limbic system, hypothalamus, and many parts of the brain, and our enjoyment is emotionally visceral and impactful. And we anchor ourselves to villains, and even in a movie called The Dark Knight, which is all about Batman, the hero, a large part of the audience is there to see the interpretation of the Joker and the conflict he and Batman have. And the full face reveal is all about ensuring that this face sticks with you, because you're going to be seeing a lot of it, and the villain is here as the main viewing point. Unlike the hidden monster, which is all about threat, the danger of what's under the water or lurking in the dark, the face is the threat here, and it sets this villain above everything else. And another factor of the full face reveal is the charisma the villain brings and the fun they are going to have turning the world upside down. And back to anchoring, which I discussed at the start, a hidden creature has a different effect because we're always wondering what or who is doing this, but with the full face villain reveal, the opening scene is all about saying this is what you'll be seeing, with the aim that we want to see more of them and build an association like we do with a brand or logo, and also kind of revel in their fun and chaos, because although it's wrong, it's okay to empathise and just pretend, because movies are pretend, but we can also sit and just be entertained by thinking, what if I could turn the world like that? What if I could do these things? It's a very powerful way of engaging with someone on screen. Finally, in our flow-through chart, let's come to the Behemoth. This is all about size and size alone, because size has connective tissue to strength and destructive power, and the film will use scaling to heighten our vulnerabilities whilst emphasising the sheer omnipotence of the monster. Whilst the unseen monster intro is one facet of villain introduction, and we should never see a Leviathan that will eventually attack a city straight away, when the monster does emerge, the entrance should be all about scale, devastation, and unprecedented destruction. Monsters like Cthulhu and Godzilla should show existential dread, as they are stand-ins for uncontrollable forces of nature or technology. And that's because Leviathans and Kaijus trigger the same terror as earthquakes or pandemics, forcing humans to confront our own insignificance. And when they finally arise, they should be impervious to everything in our arsenal, they should dwarf us, and they should leave us in awe of their power. After all, despite cinema losing its taste for citywide ruin after the horrors of 9/11 were broadcast on TV back in September 2001, time has passed and movie studios are now more than happy to go back to giving us the catharsis of destruction as we witness the obliteration of cityscapes, and this allows audiences to safely release suppressed anxieties about urban alienation, over industrialization, and also feel immersed in the disaster movie because we now have the technology to make any monster or catastrophic event come to life and make the destruction look realistic. Like I said, giant monsters represent nature, and often these mutations are down to man-made technology. After all, Godzilla was mutated by the atomic bomb. Now, we have all seen the power of nature at certain points in our life, be it a hurricane, a tornado, or even a mild storm, and we know that when thunder roars or 8 inches of snow falls from the sky and cuts off the power, it shows how fragile we truly are against the elements. Complex societies are very easy to break apart because once you break power, internet, roads, all these systems, people are very isolated, and suddenly we realise just how frangible existence is. And so when the behemoth emerges, we need to have a similar factor of devastation, humans feeling insignificant and everything being cut off as it stomps through the city and makes us quite squishy, and our so-called advanced and complex society becomes very, very vulnerable. One of the best introductions is in 1998's Godzilla, directed by Roland Emmerich, which was a truly awful movie, but did introduce its monster with scale and ferocity as two horns and something enormous glides from the ocean towards a pier and towards a city. The size, the framing, the destruction is initially impressive, and we feel the gravitas of this kaiju arriving underwater and slowly approaching the city. It's just a shame that the rest of the movie was total garbage, and Godzilla was a big iguana that was quite easy to kill in the end. Now, our brains do something pretty cool when we're watching proper set pieces of monster reveals and citywide destruction being done, and when Godzilla attacks Japan in Godzilla Minus One, it affects something called our default mode network. Now, this brain area deals with rumination and self-esteem and is suddenly quietened down, and instead of thinking about ourselves as a central figure with the world revolving around us, it can shift the focus and perception to create something called the small self, which is all then built around the mind trying to map scale and vastness into something comprehensible. In other words, the default mode network switches from thinking of us in a place where we are the centre to suddenly being very small and everything around it. And that's why great filmmakers should use scale and impact and show destruction properly and the horror of it, because it's amazing how our brains can suddenly go from perceiving ourselves in the world to perceiving how immense that would be as we try and form a rational, coping understanding of what we're seeing. And this response to scale is not only emotional, but it's also cognitive. In other words, when an audience confronts an image of overwhelming physical vastness, such as a behemoths monster, the brain works harder to process unfamiliar dimensions and spatial relationships. The visual system is then forced to map something that exceeds our ordinary human proportions, whilst the mind all the time is attempting to recalibrate its expectations in order to make sense of what it is seeing. This is why the behemoth introduction can feel so powerful, because it does not merely show destruction, but confronts the viewer with a form of magnitude that stretches perception itself and reinforces the unsettling idea that human beings are small, fragile, fundamentally outmatched, and when it comes down to it, our way of life and our society is frangible and easily crushed. And if the introduction is botched, or you leave the Leviathan or kaiju in the dark, and you fail to show the impact or devastation of an introduction, such as destroying a city, then our brains don't begin this mental reprocessing correctly. Even if it's not a kaiju, take Independence Day, when the 15-mile wide spaceships appear and we see the size of them as they spread across the city. And immediately our brains begin remapping and reprocessing the awe, and it builds a crucial frame of geography into our understanding. And awe is central to how a large monster in cinema or a giant spaceship works. When a film presents a creature of impossible size rising over a city or emerging from the sea, the audience experiences more than just simple fear. There is also a great sense of wonder because the image forces us to confront something far beyond our ordinary human proportion. And that mixture of terror and amazement is what gives the behemoth its distinctive power and iconography. We are frightened by the destruction it can cause, yet we are also captivated by the sheer spectacle of its existence. And, like I said, this is why giant monsters remain so memorable. Their scale does not simply threaten the characters within the story, it also alters the audience's sense of perspective. And faced with images of overwhelming size, viewers are encouraged to feel small, vulnerable, and use their empathy to feel temporarily insignificant, which deepens the impact of the spectacle that you're seeing. And in films such as Godzilla Minus One or Independence Day, the introduction of a colossal threat works because the camera gives us enough visual context to understand the proportions involved. Skyscrapers, bridges, roads, and crowds become measuring tools for our brains, so we can allow the monster's scale to register and fully appreciate its arrival, and we go into awe and wonder as we see it destroying everything around it. And as we experience wonder and appreciate the enormous size and credible depictions of destruction, this leaves fingerprint memories on our brain, which are long-term engagement systems for sensation, memory, and self-awareness as we appreciate what we're seeing in the short term. And again, like I said in the last video, great villain introductions stay with us all our lives. We remember great villains because they're ingrained and they've been built in and left these very good imprints. And another thing about awe is how it affects the brain in a similar way that hunger sculpts networks of our appetite. And this is because movie moments of great monsters and catastrophic introductions shape the neural networks through which we find long-term meaning, association, and appreciation. And when you see things on the news, real life catastrophes, earthquakes, so forth, it almost fuels those connections as we try and map size and catastrophe and tragedy into what we're seeing and how that works. Ultimately, the Behemoth introduction is crucial because it combines fear with awe, and both fear and awe change our brain chemistry and leave imprints and expand our perceptions. A large monster is not memorable simply because it can destroy buildings, but because its first appearance makes the audience feel the limits of human control and insignificance. And by carefully staging scale, devastation, and using perspective, filmmakers ensure that the monster's arrival is not just seen, but felt. And that is what makes these introductions in villains so effective, especially in large monster movies, because again, we use empathy, combining with tragedy, combining with what we're seeing and appreciation, geography, remapping. And most importantly of all, it's that first impression which counts, because you never get a second chance to make a first impression, and seeing a great antagonist, monster or villain in a movie for the first time should make you feel something on top of the images you are seeing and the sounds you are hearing. Anyway, that's it for this week's video. So remember that psychology is cool.
So cool.
Please like, share and subscribe, as more subs means more vids, and even leave a comment or start a discussion, as healthy debate is always welcome on here. And as ever, until next time, I'll catch you later.